Hello, and welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. Each episode, we talk about a particular topic in the life of a professor. Ruth is a visiting professor at a large university in Ireland, and Claire is an associate professor at a primarily undergraduate university in Northern California. The purpose of our podcast is reflection, so we bring something we think is working and something we're working on to discuss.
Welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. I'm Ruth.
And I'm Claire, and today we're excited to talk with our new Associate Dean and previous guest co-host on the podcast, Bori Mazzag.
Bori was promoted to Associate Dean at Humboldt earlier this year, and in this episode she shares with us what her new role entails, what the transition has been like, and what she likes about her new role.
In this episode, Bori mentions the transition that our university is going through. We've been recently designated as the third polytechnic in the California State University system, which brings exciting new programs and opportunities to our campus.
We loved talking with Bori, and we think you'll really enjoy this interview.
Welcome back, Bori.
Thank you. It's really nice to see both of you.
You too.
So, Bori, the last time you were on the podcast a year ago, you were a professor in the mathematics department. You just wrapped up being chair of the math department, and you were about to go on sabbatical. So since then, just to catch people up, you've been selected as the new associate dean in the College of Natural Resources and Sciences at Cal Poly Humboldt, and you've been in that role for a few months. So congratulations on your new position.
Thank you very much.
And so what is the role of associate dean? Like, what do you do on a daily basis?
Yeah, so the associate dean is pretty much, as the name suggests, is an associate or like a helper of the dean, and the dean is the head of a college. So a college is made up of different departments, and so the dean is sort of the administrative director, chair, head person for that unit, and the associate dean is pretty much their underling, who's the helper. And what do I do on a daily basis? That's a really good question. I'm still trying to figure that out. I've been in the position for about 4 months, and it seems like it's pretty varied. I have a few roles and a few meetings that happen every week. For example, I'm part of the university-wide curriculum committee representing the college, so that's something that happens every week. We meet with the chairs in our college, so that happens pretty much weekly too. But then most of my time is actually scheduled differently each week, and the actual tasks change from week to week. So I haven't gone through obviously a full year yet, a full cycle yet. So. In many ways, I feel like I'm still learning what exactly an associate dean does.
That's cool.
That's super cool. I'm interested, just as a follow-up to that, so your schedule changes week to week. How much of it is pre-planned, like, oh, in the fall we always have to go through RTP files, versus, oh, something came up and we have to deal with it today kind of things, or yeah? I
would say probably more than half of it is stuff that comes up. And yeah, somewhere 30 to 40% is the constant things.
Cool.
Yeah. So maybe, again, to give a little bit more context for that. So like I said, I serve on the university's curriculum committee. So I'm doing curriculum. I do schedule planning. So after the departments do their scheduling for a semester, they consult with me, we look it over, and we talk about, where they expect things to be under and over enrolled. But then I'm also dealing with student grievances. So if something is happening in a classroom that a student feels uncomfortable with, then the typical or expected course of events is that student would try to bring it up with the instructor and resolve it. If that doesn't work, they go to the department chair. And then if that doesn't get dissolved, then things come to me. But of course, it doesn't always work quite that way. But that's an example of a job that I have that, where student complaints come up kind of unscheduled. Yeah.
Yeah, that they do.
Yes.
Yeah.
How interesting.
That's so interesting too, because Sometimes you're like, what does a normal job that isn't governed completely by class schedules? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's interesting to get that insight.
Yeah, definitely.
So what drew you to the role, and what kinds of things do you love about it?
I think the biggest draw for me was the transformation that our universities is going through. And there's an expansion, especially in our college. And we're trying to launch new programs that will be, forward-looking and responsive to current needs. And I was involved in that work quite a bit before I got this new position. And that really is so exciting to me. I mean, I just love the vision that our university articulated. And I think that was kind of what made me decide that this was something I wanted to do. I also, for better or for worse, I'm trying to embrace this. I actually really like just getting things to work, getting things to function. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's kind of a big part of the current job that I have, right? So the dean is somebody who represents the department and has this external facing part of their job. And the associate dean is sort of the I don't know, I hesitate to say the mom of the college, but like the person who gets stuff done, right? Like I am kind of the following up on things, making sure that things run as they're supposed to.
That's awesome. How cool.
That sounds like, from everything I know about working with you, that sounds like tailor-made for you, for sure. So what do you feel like are some of the challenges of being the associate dean?
Well, part of the challenges, I would say, is figuring out how the roles are going to be divided. So we had a couple of conversations about that at the start of the year. But there are many things, many questions that pop up that straddle different things. So for example, if you're thinking about student complaints, that can really easily tie together with having to resolve issues between faculty, right? So things don't come in neat packages that you can break into areas, or not always. And so just having to figure out who takes care of what has been actually a little bit harder than I would have liked. Mm-hmm. And so I'm hoping that, we have definitely fallen, like we meaning the college team or the college office has, we have gotten into a routine, but it's definitely something that I think after maybe about a year, we would want to revisit and just figure out where sort of the gray areas were. And then having to deal with student grievances is hard, right? Like that's always difficult, because you want to be able to give a fair hearing to the student, but also consider the faculty's rights and give faculty a fair hearing too. So I think just like in any job, the hardest part is dealing with people and making sure that you're going into situations open-minded and with good intentions.
Yeah, not easy to do. And then somebody has to be disappointed, usually in an outcome, like in a situation like that.
Yeah, unfortunately, I am not the final say. So if I can't resolve things, there are other steps beyond me. But but obviously, you want to be able to help people. Yeah.
So just to follow up on that and make sure I'm visualizing it correctly, like a student grievance email, I assume, comes in, and it's part of the system that's something that you'll take on as opposed to the dean. Is that right?
Yeah, and sometimes things come directly to me, or sometimes they get forwarded to me. So the student might have reached out to somebody, because one of the things I'm finding is that students don't really know that this is kind of the normal process of things.
Sure.
Oh, totally.
So, yeah, so typically things get to me in pretty roundabout ways. Yeah.
That makes sense. Interesting.
I found even in previous times, like students didn't really know what a dean was, or even a chair of a department. So
definitely,
I think I can definitely see that they might not. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't feel like I knew until I started my role as a professor. So.
Yeah, definitely. It's not really something that you ever think about that much. And I think for students, like it gets so murky, like they know they're professors, but even the fact that out of their classroom instructors, there are sort of these different hierarchies of professors versus lecturers. I mean, I think a lot of that is lost on them, and really it shouldn't matter. But yeah, that's actually one of the things I've been thinking about is how do you make it more transparent to students what they can do to follow up if something is not going right. Because I think a lot of times you could be much more effective if you heard about problems as they start, but typically by the time students reach out to somebody outside of the classroom, things have gotten pretty bad. And at that point, it's much harder to do anything, right? Like by then, everybody has kind of dug into their positions. So conversations are a lot harder to break through.
Yeah.
That's a really good point. How interesting.
I kind of secretly was like, oh, sweet, now you don't have to deal with students anymore. But no, I don't mean that, by the way, at all. That's not my philosophy. But I guess you're doing it even more so.
Well, sort of. I mean, I think there is definitely the danger that as you're not in the classroom, you get a little bit removed from that experience. And, as a faculty member, it definitely used to be frustrating when administrators would have sort of these rosy pictures of what classroom teaching was like, or the power that you had, or, what students were all about. And so it actually really helps that my husband is a professor, so I get that dose of reality from him on a daily basis.
Excellent.
Just so we've talked a lot about student grievances. What percentage of your time is spent on those kind of things? Like, it seems like there's probably a bunch of other things that come up unscheduled, and then lots of scheduled things. I just kind of wanted to get an idea of the balance.
Yeah, honestly, it has not been that big of a part. Probably maybe 15 to 20% of my time so far. I'm kind of expecting that as the end of the semester draws near, there will be more of it, just because that's how it is. But yeah, it has not been a huge part. Yeah,
that's good. And then can you tell us a little bit about the transition from being professor and chair to switching to associate dean? What has that transition been like? And has there been any unexpected similarities or differences between those roles?
That's a great question. Part of the transition, I'd say, could have been a little smoother. So I think our university doesn't do a great job in training people for the roles they have for any level, right? Whether that's a staff position, whether that's a faculty position, we're expected to just know all of the complicated systems that we use. And I certainly had the advantage of having been on campus and having used many of the systems. But when you get new roles, there are, functionalities in some of the software that we use that are new to me, or some processes that are new. And I feel like our university likes to just throw people in and let them figure it out. So again, just because I've been around and I know like who I should ask for help.
That's helpful. Yeah.
That has been helpful. So I feel like it hasn't been as rocky as it could have been, but I definitely think it also could have been much better. Yeah. So I would say that part of the transition wasn't so great, but then again, because I'm at the same campus where I was before, and because of my chair role and my role in various other service capacities, the actual work that I'm doing has not felt like that much of a leap compared to what I did before. Yeah, so that part has been pretty easy, I would say. Yeah.
So I was going to ask you now about skills that are transferable from your previous experience as a professor and a chair. And like, what other skills are you developing? And this feels, because I've been kind of doing job search stuff, and I feel so institutionalized to teaching. I'm like, I can do this one thing, and I can write a syllabus, and I can write an exam, but then I don't totally know how to like talk about those things in like other, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I guess there is a lot of leadership and organization, you know, that sort of thing, but it's quite hard to sort of verbalize that. And I have a friend who, she made a transition from professoring to industry, and her husband had worked in industry for years, and so she literally was like, here is what I would say, and then he would translate it into business speak, or you know what I mean, for her. So yeah, but so for you, what did you find was really transferable from the classroom and from being a chair to your new role?
That is such a great question, and I think I really hear what you're saying, Ruth, right? Like, a lot of times academics feel like they have one skill, which is teaching, or however you want to define it, or maybe it's research, and they don't necessarily recognize how complex that task is, right? So, you know, right off the bat, I would say that when you're teaching, you have a lot of verbal and written communication skills that you're honing, right? Because you're trying to reach an audience in multiple different ways. Definitely, you get a lot of experience dealing with students, right? So that's also a lot of times conflict resolution and facilitating conversations when you're trying to resolve issues between students. There's a lot of management, right? Just in terms of classroom management and setting deadlines and making sure that whatever you're putting out there for your students makes sense. Then most faculty do a lot of service, right? So on those committees, you're also basically honing your leadership skills, leadership and administrative skills, right? Whether that's working together with other people or setting up structures to get something done. So I would say all of those things are completely transferable to these administrative positions. And then certainly as chair, you know, the scheduling, budgeting is pretty limited at our university in your role as department chair, but you definitely get some authority over some amount of money. So that's, I would say that is something that again is transferable. And then again, I would come back to university service. So I mentioned that I was pretty involved in some of the planning that we were doing for this polytechnic transition that our university went through. And that has been a big part of my current job, of my current position, is continuing to work on that. So I would say in that area, I feel like I haven't really skipped a beat going from faculty to being an administrator. Yeah. It has been pretty similar, right? The sort of things that I did before and that I'm doing now. It's maybe just I'm participating in a slightly different set of meetings than I would have before, but it's pretty similar to that.
That's really cool.
Cool.
And then, what skills are there? Different skills that you feel like you're developing now in your new role?
Yeah, that is a really good part of the question that I forgot to address. So I think figuring out the external facing part of the job, so talking to donors, talking to companies, talking to schools, right, high schools and community colleges. I did a little bit of that before, certainly in terms of recruitment, right? Like when you're a chair, you do some of these outreach events where students come to check out your university. But I'm doing more of that. And like I said, that's largely the dean who's doing those kinds of things. But I am doing some of the events where you go and like last night I went to to our town's like Chamber of Commerce mixer, and
Wow.
I've never done anything like that. It was pretty interesting.
I can't even imagine. I bet.
Yeah, I don't exactly know what I was supposed to do, but I chit-chatted with a bunch of people, and just because I
bet that's exactly what you're supposed to do.
I think so. So I think I don't think that there is anything specific I needed to do, just kind of represent Humboldt, but certainly being more skilled at that, and yeah, doing it more intentionally rather than just, well, I'll just go and chit chat. It's probably a skill that I feel like I'm developing. Yeah.
That's really interesting. Do you find, so you're going to more community events? Are you going to more university events too in your role of associate dean and representing the college kind of thing?
I am doing somewhat more of that, although I would say I was pretty active and would attend a lot of things even before as a faculty member. So I think our university does a pretty good job with having, open forums and presentations that anybody can go to. Yeah, there are definitely some meetings that, I'm invited to as a representative of the college now. So those are important. Yeah.
That's cool. And I wonder if that leads into our next question, which is what steps did you take that put you in a position to be considered for the associate dean role? Maybe it was attending a lot of events and being involved in the polytechnic transition, but I'd love to hear all your thoughts about that.
Yeah. So I definitely was pretty involved in, I guess, maybe faculty governance is the right word. I was never part of our academic senate. I think that's another way to be involved in this, but certainly really engaged with, the current issues at the university. So the Polytech is a big example of that, but I would say there are other things before, right? Like where I would just kind of show up and listen to where the conversations were. And I think that was definitely a big part of getting ready for this role. Or I wouldn't even put it like that, right? Like it wasn't that I was intentionally getting ready for some role. It was more just like, these were the things that were engaging me. And I would go to the professional development on, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I would engage in conversations about what different people were doing. And I would attend all kinds of presentations and just kind of pay attention to what was going on at the university. And I cared. I think one thing I would say that has been sort of interesting is that for my interests have definitely been shifting from being a scholar and a teacher to kind of the issues of the university in general. And I think sometimes that's frowned upon, right? Like people talk about going over to the dark side when you become an administrator. And yeah, I definitely feel like there is a little bit of an identity crisis as I was, contemplating this job and accepting this job. And I think the identity crisis comes from the fact that I actually really like it, right? Like these are the interests that I've had for a while. But I feel like as a faculty member, there's a little bit of a stigma attached to admitting this, that you don't...
See, I wanted to ask you... So I'm going to say this just as a side note, but because in America, it's administration and it means the upper decision makers. And then in Ireland, we say management and administration means staff. Anyway, it's confusing. But there is a sense as a faculty member that the administration is the enemy, right?
Yes.
And I was wondering, when did that start to shift for you? Or because one of my favorite things about you is that you're not cynical at all. And even with those events, I can imagine hearing about that. And I'm like, well, here we go. Here's another pretend event where they're going to listen to faculty. And you're like, oh, no, I'm going to go and really contribute. But did you find becoming chair gave you enough insight to be like, oh, these people aren't actively trying to mess up our day? Do you know what I mean? Or when did you feel like you started to notice that maybe the administrators weren't totally evil?
Yeah, I think it was through my service as chair, and that's really something that I was kind of thrown into, or it was not something that I was planning on doing. And then we had chair elections, and somebody basically told me that, that they were going to put my name forward. And I was like, okay, I guess. I was surprised by that. And, it sort of came out of the blue. But then I found that I really did enjoy thinking about how to make our department function better. And then we've had a few administrators that I've really kind of liked, and I found them not just engaging, but also kind of what you're saying, like they are people and they are trying to do right, and they are putting things in place that really like tangibly make the university a better place. So I would put our current provost into that category. Then we had a dean who came from my department, so I knew him somewhat on a personal level. And so I think they were really good examples for me of how you can be an administrator and, yield the power, whatever power you have, for good. Yeah. So I think that's
super helpful. Yeah. That's very cool. And do you have any advice for professors who want to engage more with administrative? I feel like you said some of this stuff.
Yeah.
But for people who want to engage more with those roles, what would be your advice?
I would say serve on committees that you enjoy. And I think that sort of paves a path, right? I definitely feel like I got involved in things that I cared about, at the very beginning of my time at Humboldt, for example. We had young kids, so I served on some committee that was looking at childcare on campus. So I think if you just engage with the things that directly impact you and that you care about, then that might lead to somewhere, that might lead to administrative positions or other things. It's kind of like with research, right? If you're following the leads and if you're following the things that interest you, I think it tends to open up possibilities that you didn't even really think about.
See, I love this. And I actually had a conversation with a friend yesterday, the one who used to be in academia and moved out of it. And she just kind of like a lot of what you're saying is echoing what she said, where she just really realized the things that she was interested in and doing it. And I love that you're able to identify that you love fixing stuff behind the scenes and doing all of, making things run smoother and how important that is. And I feel like there's such mythology as a faculty member that you should be into everything. You should be equally passionate about teaching and research, and it's totally cool to find the stuff that you're interested in and pursue that.
Yeah.
And not be going forward in all directions or whatever.
And I think even saying that, oh, you just do teaching or just do research, I mean, everybody has a very unique approach to that, right? Two people can teach the same exact class and their classrooms will be really different. And I think, what you do comes from your personality and your experiences and what works for you. And so I think, I think you have these unique approaches and unique skills. And I think that's, people should embrace that and build on that. Maybe one other thing, this is kind of circling back to an earlier question, but what skills do you bring from being a faculty member to being an administrator? Certainly when you're managing a research team, even if it's just your own research, but if you have a lab where you have students, then I think you're practicing some management skills, right? Because you're providing tasks for the students, you're envisioning what the project will be, and you're mapping it out kind of one step at a time for the students. You're, depending on your lab, right? In mathematics, this is less of the case because we use paper and pencil and software. So there isn't a lot of management of supplies and ordering things and physical things that you have to do. But certainly in experimental sciences, you would actually deal with the with the having to order things and making sure that everything is in place and that, I don't know, students have access to the things. So that kind of management, I think that translates to.
That makes a lot of sense. I really appreciated your list of all the transferable skills and agreed with them all, but hadn't really thought of most of them. So that was really helpful. Is there anything else that we haven't covered that you would like to share with our listeners?
I think it's this idea that that administrative positions can really be fun, and that I think there is a bit of a stigma attached to that. And I would just encourage people to embrace their administrative side if that is something that they feel like they have some attraction to. I don't know if this is fantasy, but I keep telling myself that you can always go back to a faculty position, right? Again, I'm thinking of our former dean who retreated back to a faculty position. So, so I feel like it's sort of a low stakes way of making a career move to see if it works for you. But I think it's very satisfying to see the impact of what you can do.
I love that. Embrace your administrative side.
Yes, come over to the administrative side.
That's what we're calling it. No more dark side.
Yeah.
We're calling it and it's interesting. I think more and more people are understanding that the idea that you have to enjoy the same thing in the same way forever is also kind of ridiculous. Do you know what I mean? So like even the things that you love about teaching, but when you're ready for a fresh challenge, maybe you want to just move on, and it doesn't have to be choosing one over the other, or that you think one is better or whatever. Just new things.
Yeah, definitely.
It's refreshing.
And, like at every level in STEM, we need women and female representations and just representation in general. But I definitely would say that too, that if you think that there are some systems that don't work well, then you can, engage and start changing those systems. And for some of that, you need more power than being a faculty member.
Very, very good point.
Well, thanks so much for being on the show, Bori.
Thank you both. This has been such a fun conversation.
Thanks so much for joining us on the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. We're delighted to have you as a listener, and we would love to hear from you. And if you want to email us, our address is contactprofessorpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear any of your suggestions for future shows, or professor quotes that you might want to share with us, or even just things that have come up for you when you were listening to previous episodes. And if you've been enjoying the podcast, we would love if you would spread the word. So the best way to spread word is by telling people if you think they should listen to it, or you can leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.